Hello, welcome to episode 23 of Defense Against the Dark Arts. I'm Paul Miil, and this episode is on causal reasoning. Causal reasoning, causes. It's a really simple concept, and a lot of people seem to mess it up for some reason. You think of, I'll give some definitions here. Really simple stuff. Cause is to make something happen. A relation is an association between things, the manner in which they are associated. That's relation, right? We know these things. We know cause means. We know what relation means, right? So what's a relation? She is scratching his back. They are associated by her scratching his back. That is the association between those two things. It could be one directional, right? Then there's correlation. It's where a lot of people get screwed up. It's simple. Correlation is a complementary relationship between objects. Complementary is the operative word. A reciprocal relationship. Reciprocal as in reciprocity, not as in inverse. Not the reciprocal like you flip it. Reciprocity, like, two people shaking a hand, right? That's a reciprocal relationship, right? A business dealing. Reciprocal. Two people are getting something out of it, right? So like they are scratching each other's back. They are associated by the reciprocal relation of scratching each other's back. Right, so now we got correlation, relation, and cause. We're down, right? So incident. What is an incident? An incident is an event, an occurrence, a happening, an incident. Right? Simple. So what is a coincident? A coincident is two events happening at the same time or same place. So it could be happening just at the same time, or it could be happening at the same time at the same place. Not the same point in space, probably, because I think that's going to go against some law of physics. Right? So coincident. Two events happening at the same time in space. Coincident. Concurrent. What does concurrent mean? It means some things are happening at the same time. Doesn't mean two. It could be a multiple thing, right? Concurrent. You could be having courses that are concurrent. You could have, two events or 10 events all happening concurrently, right? And if you're invading some country, you could have concurrent operations, right? So, what do we have? We have concurrent, coincident. So what's coincidence? Coincidence. People confuse coincidence all the time with coincident. Coincidence is remarkable. Concurrence of events or circumstances with no apparent connection. So what does that mean? Coincidence. Two things, or there's two events that are remarkable. Wow, look at that. But there doesn't appear to be a causal relation. So you don't know what caused both these things to happen, but they both happened, and they're really weird. We've all seen coincidences. Well, that's a coincidence, right? I can't think of one off the top of my head, but so it's the appearance of a meaningful connection when there is none. There is no connection. It just appears like it. That is called coincidence. That's how we define it, right? There is no special woo-woo. That is a coincidence. This is related to synchronicity. This is where we do have a little bit of woo-woo. So if you see something that's a coincidence and you believe that there is some kind of meaning behind it, so that's the difference between synchronicity and coincidence. Now, synchronicity is from, I don't know if it came from before this, but the earliest I think is Carl Jung wrote a book, I think, called Synchronicity. So it's a remarkable concurrence of events that seem to be meaningfully related. Now, they don't say they are, and they don't say they're not. They just seem to be. That's synchronicity. So it could be meaningfully related. We're not saying they're not. Whereas a coincidence, we are saying there is no meaningful connection between the two. Right? So this is just to get the definition straight when we talk about this kind of stuff. So synchronicities may have meaningful connections, right? They may not. But it's starting to get a little woo-woo. So there's also anti-correlation, right? Where one of the values goes up when the other value goes down, instead of correlating, instead of two things happening at the same time, both advancing, one goes backwards when the other one goes forwards. That's anti-correlation. And there's a decorrelation, which is the reduction of the overall or removal of correlation. So when you're starting to whittle away at something, well, that's not really a correlation. You're decorrelating, right? We can decorrelate apparent correlations. There's autocorrelation, which I think is like a feedback, where it cross-correlates itself, from a different instance in time. But this is getting beyond the scope. So we talked about empirical as well. That's an important thing. Empirical means observation. That's all it means. Empirical evidence means somebody observed it. When we observe a magic trick, right, we're observing it. We're fooled. So empirical does not mean irrefutable, and doesn't mean what you see is the truth, because we can easily be fooled by phantom connections. But empirical just means it's observed. So you observed the magician putting a metal ring through another metal ring. You observed that. That's empirical evidence, even though you know it's wrong, right? You may not know that the ring has a little highly machined, highly accurate little carabiner type clip that opens up and you can slip the ring through the other ring, right? You may not know that, but doesn't mean you didn't observe it, right? So cogent. What does cogent mean? Clear, logical, and convincing. And you think of a concept. That's another one we need to know. Concept is ideas or notions that are in your mind. That's what is a concept, right? It's ideas or concepts that are in your mind. And so then that brings you to cognition, right? What is cognition? Cognition is the process of acquiring knowledge and understanding it through experiences. So now I think we got enough definitions to start this one off, right? We're not going to be using all these, but you need to know the nuance, because a lot of people think they know what a word means, and then they well, no, I don't really. That's the nuance, the difference, right? So anyway, so causal arguments are phantom connections. I did a whole episode on phantom connections earlier, and the gist is that all the evidence you have may logically point to one and only one conclusion. But we are not omniscient, right? We don't know all the evidence. We just have a limited amount of evidence, our subjective, view. So there may be evidence we don't have, and therefore our inferences are only presumptions. And we may be completely wrong, despite all the evidence currently pointing to that one conclusion. That is a phantom connection. This happens countless times in all of our lives throughout the history of the species, right? And this is a vector of attack. If a manipulator only allows their targets to access certain evidence, the target will make fallacious phantom connections. They will come to the wrong conclusion, or the right conclusion, depending if you're the manipulator or not. So if you're the manipulator, you want them to come to the conclusion you want them to, which may be a false conclusion. It's not a true conclusion, or a conclusion based on truth. It's a conclusion based on whatever fabricated scenario they've created. It's like magic, right? The magicians do the exact same thing. They want you to come to the conclusion that they want you to come to, not what the true conclusion is. Not that there's a carabiner type latch in the metal rings or whatever, right? This is why control of information is of critical importance to the manipulator. And freedom of information is of critical importance to those who seek the truth. So you have like abusive spouses who control information available to their targets. You have abusive governments that control the information available to their targets. We have cults that control information that's available to their targets. We have ideological wackos like Marxists who seek to control the information to their targets. Now we have big tech controlling the information to their targets. So by definition, non-deductive arguments cannot be proven. Now I'm not going to talk about causally sufficient reasoning, because remember there's sufficient, right, and what's the other one? Sufficient and necessary conditions, right? When you use normal deductive logic, but I'm not going to talk about sufficient or causally necessary, causally sufficient or causally necessary conditions, because I think it's all bullshit, since this is non-deductive logic, right? And so does this mean we have to throw out causal reasoning altogether? No, of course not. We sometimes have to consider arguments whose premises do not prove anything, but they only give it support. So this is what we do when we look for plausible arguments. Now, we just because it's plausible doesn't mean it's true. I mean, we need to remember that. And a lot of people have a hard time making a judgment and then not remembering that judgment is an absolute fact. It's just the best judgment you made at the time, and it is open for revisal. So we suppose. We got to remember, we suppose, and we must presume. We must seek cogent explanations. We have to be as rigorous as we can when trying to find the elusive truth. It's like a hunt, and we don't know who our enemies are, and we don't know who's throwing shade, and we don't know who's illuminating, and we don't know who our friends are, and we don't know, we know we can't be so naive as to believe everyone. We know this, especially since that defies logic, because we know there's people that are trying to sabotage us, right? We could see who's closed-minded, and therefore they're a source of false information. People that are typically closed-minded generally are going to be wrong, because they jump to a conclusion and then they hold on to that conclusion, and that conclusion more than likely is wrong. So whatever they're saying is more than likely wrong. Doesn't mean they're wrong about everything, but on the whole, you could be guaranteed that they're wrong about most things. So we can prune away the low-lying branches by just dismissing what closed-minded people say. And we hear them all the time. So common sense does go a long way if we remember that our presumptions can be wrong. So background assumptions are required for causal reasoning. So cause and effect, right? So causal reasoning. I hope you could see the potential for manipulation using causal reasoning, especially if a manipulator is willing to take the time to distort your background assumptions, like all grifters are. So these people are willing to take that time to get your background assumptions to be a certain thing, like in the news media, all this divisive racial hate that's being thrown against white people. And if there's anybody protesting things, well, they must be white Nazis or white supremacists or white nationalists. The government, especially in Canada, they do this all the time. The leftists, they'll say, if anybody's protesting something they don't like them protesting, they'll start throwing names at them, calling like these divisive names, because they're working not just on trying to discredit the people that are protesting. They're trying to build up the background assumptions that there are, look at all these, we're being surrounded by all these evil white nationalists. So it's a building, it's a long-term grift as well as a short-term discrediting tactic. So causal claims have a great amount of power and are subject to misuses. Jeez, I can't talk today. And misinterpretation by both those making the causal claims and those listening to them, right? There's two ways of you miscommunicating. You can either say it not properly and the person understands it, but they understand the wrong version, or you could say it properly and the person comprehends what you're saying. They don't get it. That's probably what happens a lot of the time. But there's a lot of chance of people miscommunicating things, even when they're trying to communicate things properly. This is the problem with communication, right? We've all had an argument where your opposition disinterprets what we say. Not misinterprets, they disinterpret. This is where they intentionally are misinterpreting our meaning. So they're disinterpreting. We immediately see it because we know what we meant, and we know that they know what we meant. You could tell by the way they're disinterpreting, right? But others listening may not. Sometimes disinterpretation is there merely to annoy you, as they know they can't refute you, so they just try to disinterpret. Oh, well, you meant this. No, it's not what I meant. I meant what I said, right? So the idea is to interpret what you mean and to spin it to appear to mean something else as quickly as possible. It's a version of the straw man fallacy. But causal reasoning is the bread and butter of liars and propagandists. This is the most important part of this discourse, right? Causes and correlations. So two separate events that happen concurrently may have no correlation. This is critical to understand, right? A lot of people, when they argue causes and correlations, they assume only one definition of this, and I'm going to give you 5. So the best causal argument can claim evidence points to a certain way. So we can only presume the claim knowing that it may not be true. So here's the five correlations. So the 5 types of correlations. So there's A causes B. So some event A causes an event B. That's the one that everybody sort of assumes. But it could also be B causes A, or some other event C causes both A and B, and that's known as a common cause. A and B could just be coincident with no cause or correlation between them, like someone getting on a bus over there and somebody riding their bike across the road over there. Those are two events that are happening at the same time, right? There's a correlation because they're happening at the same time, but that doesn't mean, there's no cause that caused both of those things to happen, right? Maybe if you go back and you get, the spawn of life, whatever, blah, blah, blah. That's just insane to go back to that far, right? So A and B, this last one now is A and B, or A is B. So there is no correlation. Or I guess there is a correlation. The correlation is identity, not causality. So A is B. So I better give some examples here. So you hear a lot with alcoholism and depression. So alcoholism, A causes B. Alcoholism causes depression. Or maybe it's B causes A. Depression causes alcoholism. Or maybe there's some other event C that causes both A and B. Just living in a crappy situation, causes both alcoholism and depression, right? That seems a little more plausible, right? Or A and B are just coincident. The dude just happens to be depressed and drunk, and there's no correlation between the two, right? If you make him so he's not depressed, maybe he's still drunk, or if you maybe, the other way around. So, and then there's A is B. So maybe I need another example for this. So anti-nationalism does not cause globalism. Maybe globalism is anti-nationalism. So, a lot of people say, anti-nationalism is a cause for globalism. Well, no. Globalism is anti-nationalism. Actually, I think globalism, I'm going to do a video on globalism. I think globalism is more about just the 1% trying to rule the world with total hegemony. Hegemony. I like hegemony better than the other definition or pronunciation. All right, so when it comes to finding the truth, there is no shame in not knowing. There is a shame in claiming to know and not knowing. Sometimes we get hung up on a question because it's the wrong question, or it doesn't have an answer because we have some wrong assumptions, or the answer is not congruent with our current schemata. Sometimes we need to change how we look at something before we can ask a question that leads to the truth. The real question might be, do we really want to know that truth? Will that bring us a greater happiness over suffering ratio, right? Of course, that depends on the context. But science works because we have feedback with objective reality. And this is the whole thing with causation and correlation, the different types, right? So the feedback, reality, objective reality is the feedback, the cause and effect. And that reality feedback is one thing, and causal reasoning is another. They are not the same thing. One is objective truth in context, and the other is a guess, because it's non-deductive, right? The inferences are inductive, using causal reasoning. And a lot of times it's wrong because people are just jumping to assumptions when they have two different things that are happening at the same time in statistics. Like crazy. You see this all the time in the news. There's often parts of our minds that believe something, and another part of your mind that wants to believe the opposite. Maybe that's just me. I don't know, but it's interesting to see what some people of science want to believe. Which things they believe on faith as fact, like dark matter or the inflationary epoch of the Big Bang, and what things they choose to ignore despite the evidence, like Jacques Cinq-Mars, or 2 + 2 = 4, or consciousness, getting all woo-woo. You should really Google Jacques Cinq-Mars, and his story is enlightening on the fallacies of science here. Not to say science is fallacious, but it's not, as it's being portrayed by a lot of those in the media. Jacques Cinq-Mars is CINQ-MARS. Cinq-Mars. Jacques Cinq-Mars. Google that guy. His story is enlightening. So at times, we don't know or understand the mechanism and say it exists, like dark matter or like the inflationary epoch. We don't understand how it all of a sudden inflated at a rate like that. Like there's no, right? But we believe it exists. And there's other times when we don't understand the mechanism and we claim things don't exist because we don't understand the mechanism. So this is a little bit of insane. This is, this time we think it's this. So yeah, we'll believe it. This time, for the very same reason, we're not going to believe it, which is crazy. Right? Humans are insane. Anyway, so on that note, I think that's it for this one. See you next episode. I think it's going to be on analogical reasoning.